What is up, y'all? It's your boy Aniki, and today we starting a new series on the channel called The Spoils of War. Now, the premise behind this is that I wanted to do a review of the war arc, but I also realized that to properly do that justice, I would end up spending like 2 to 3 hours making that video, and that's kind of an intimidating task to handle, and I don't think anybody's necessarily jumping up to watch Paranormal Liberation War Arc review the movie. So I decided I would break down certain plot points that came up within the story or were handled, or especially with this one, quietly went by without much discussion, and talk about those in the war arc as a series so people can kind of chew on which pieces they want to as they go. Now, specifically, what we're talking about today is the UA Traitor and how, uh, as far as I'm concerned, we basically got the reveal of that in the most quiet way possible. And I'm going to start off with I understand that some people view the multi trader theory. I can support that notion. As far as if there's any students involved, I'm going to say I don't support the notion of Invisible Girl. I think a lot of people overthink that scene of her in the bed sleep. It's important to note that while, yes, it's normal to sleep with covers on, and thus it can make sense to feel that it's a little strange that she might have been sleeping naked. It's still worth pointing out that this is a girl that, for her winter outfit upgrade, got thicker gloves, but was still running around naked. So the idea of her falling asleep in bed naked, and thus that imprint being her unconscious but laying in bed naked body, makes sense. Is it a little weird to think about? Sure, but it's also kind of just a reflection of the fact that she has to run around in the nude. I'm just saying she might be more comfortable at that point in her hero costume than with a blanket on. So I think that's a bit of a red herring. Aoyama I think has a lot of potential for it. There's definitely chances of overlap. For example, when if Shigaraki actually broke into UA, or if he just let reporters in, if Shigaraki did break in, he could have ran into an Aoyama who was taking his lunch separate of the other students. That's all fine and dandy. In addition to that, Aoyama's got the strange quirk that maybe he's trying to get something a little better, something more suited towards his body, something like that. There's potential there. He's very insecure and feels like he's not actually a hero. That could be reflective of guilt. So I get that. But then there's Kaminari, who I believe is like Horikoshi's favorite red herring. I think this is one that he's kind of aware of and thus decided to make fun of, especially when you factor in that he threw up that the L sign, and a lot of people were like, "Ah, yes, the Liberation Army. That means he's the traitor." And then it's like, well, in storyline, if Kaminari were loyal to the Meta Liberation Army, then that would have been irrelevant at the time of the USJ or Camino attacks or any time prior to December in the story. So that was moreover just debate. Plus, it was actually a reference to the fact that he uses I believe it's called like the left-hand rule of electromagnetism, and that was something that he had already displayed back during provisional license exam when he first took out Meatwad. So we had already had kind of like an established pattern with those characters just throughout the story. Plus, with the war arc, Kaminari was brought to the forefront, brought to the front lines, and was given the perfect opportunity to betray Hero Society and get them a guaranteed W, because he could have easily taken in that lightning, then redirected it and just fried all the heroes if he wanted to. And instead, he opted to completely neutralize the general. And the same thing kind of applies here for what happened during the war arc for Midnight, who is also a character who, when I explain why it has to be Principal Nezu, you'll also see I have to erase her candidacy. Her death is, in fact, Horikoshi putting the nail in the coffin of her, any potential of her being the traitor, because she and Present Mike and Aizawa are the key to figuring out why Nezu is the traitor, as Nezu set Aizawa up way back in the day. Now, the reason why this is important is that you have to transition back to the Aizawa flashback in My Hero Academia Vigilantes. During Vigilantes, we are introduced to a villain, Garvey. Garvey specifically runs, like he breaks free. The first thing you do is you see he's looking in a direction, he gets attacked by Buster Union, takes their attacks, moves about his day, and it makes a beeline. They even comment on how the way that Garvey got there was so fast, he ends up right by Aizawa and Loud Cloud. Now, on the surface level, you could just look at that as a villain who made a beeline, just decided to just wild out, breaking out of a factory, whatever, just going loose and just running in a straight line. But We know that Garvey is another one of experiments made by Ujiko in All for One. So if that's the case, then that more than likely would have been the result of programming. And Ujiko essentially confirms this during the war arc. You see, as the DJ is dragging him away, he says, "Oh yeah, you're." He acknowledges that his relationship with Shirakumo and Aizawa, and he directly states, "Back then, I wanted to get my hands on a razor." Now, one of the big memes in the My Hero Academia community is that if Eraser had been at Kamino, it would have been over in 5 seconds because he could have just looked at All for One. Now, specifically with Shigaraki, the only reason that wasn't the case is because Shigaraki has been physically modified so that his body was still a massive threat. Otherwise, Aizawa would have locked him down right then and there during this arc, and that would have been the end of the story. Aizawa's power is one that, during the overhaul arc, he was basically kidnapped by the Shia Hisaika for a bit because they were going to try to take some of his DNA, more than likely do some experiments with his quirk, because they also had done research into him, specifically because of the fact that they were trying to make quirk erasing bullets. So this idea that All for One wanted Aizawa back then makes sense. You pair it with the fact that he still settled on the idea of getting Loud Cloud's body, and then it's like, oh, well, he made the best of a bad situation. And the reason why this kind of like proves it kind of has to be Nezu is that the only person who had that information, Midnight, sacrificed herself and died. Present Mike, again, had the perfect opportunity, just like Kaminari did, to betray them all, blow their ears out, and help the Hayanomu jump them, and instead guaranteed that Shigaraki did not reach 100%, then apprehended the doctor. And was kind of terrified of him. Specifically has commentary of him being afraid of him, which if he's creeped out by him, then he likely wouldn't be just hanging out with All for One either. So we got both of those debunked. The fact that Aizawa was a target by Ujiko means that he's likely not going to be the one betraying himself, trying to get his own quirk taken and his own life murked. So the question becomes, well, who had access to the information to know what hero agency that Aizawa was at and where they would have been stationed? And the answer is Nezu, from what we know. No other teacher is at an age during the Aizawa flashback that would justify them having that access to the information, with the only exceptions being Power Loader and Ectoplasm, who we don't know if they were teachers at the time. Ectoplasm lost his legs in combat. So the idea that he would go so far as to keep being a hero and become a hero teacher to help guide the next generation and still be a traitor seems kind of far-fetched. I'll admit we don't have anything about Power Loader to really know anything, but also the sheer lack of relevance to the story makes it very unlikely that that would be the UA traitor. So if we look at it from that perspective, Nezu is pretty much the only candidate that would have had Class 1A schedules, access to those informations, would have gotten a hold of the information that Izuku Midori was one of For All's wielders, so that would have been confirmed for All for One through Nezu, as well as the fact that Nezu was likely the principal, if I'm not mistaken, was the principal even back when Aizawa was a student, which would allow for him to have the ability to set up both Aizawa back then and at the USJ, because when we look at it from that perspective, one of the bonus features that All for One might have been looking to get out of the attack on the USJ was Aizawa. If they would have managed to kill All Might and take Aizawa, then they would have gotten their old goal plus the bonus goal of taking out All Might for, their revenge. It kind of works as a double bluff. The entire time, Aizawa has been one of the most important targets within the story because of his power, and people have constantly coveted it and sought it out. So Nezu has been trying to get him out. And if you think about it, Nezu giving Aizawa the ability to expel students and then bring them back in is such an extreme ability, but it does work as an incentive to keep Aizawa close by and allow him to be able to eventually offer him to All for One. Now, if you're wondering why Nezu would be the traitor when he's made all these statements, one of the things talked about during the war arc at the very beginning, also surrounding this Aizawa plot, was that they missed the fact that Shirakumo was a Nomu because of his level of sophistication. We know that Principal Nezu has been operated on. We know that he's been experimented on by humans and that it causes him to randomly burst into sadistic rage or fits. in bouts, as we saw during the final exam arc when he was having his jollies torturing Kaminari and Mina, not Kirishima. So could it be, and would it most likely be, that one of the world's most renowned quirk scientists would have been involved in those experiments? If we know that we can program Nomu so as sophisticated as Kurogiri to fit in and seem like they're just living people, then why not a mouse who, as far as the world knows, has the quirk high spec, making him very intelligent. But it's also worth noting that we've seen hyperintelligence quirks in the series before, though technically in an anime, questionably filler, arguably canon, depending on how you want to interpret it. Seen with the girl from one of the schools in the provisional license exam, who she specifically had to drink tea, and then when she would close her eyes, it would raise her IQ and allow her to make intelligent calculations. We see that Nezu is always drinking tea. This is one of those things that it could be that he's actually got a multitude of quirks stockpiled within him, so that he appears to just be this intelligent rodent, but is already so much more than that Ujigao is programmed. Furthermore, I don't think that he needs to be aware that he is a mole, or he needs to know directly that he is the mole, but rather there's things that happen in a lot of these series that you give people code words. Something like this in Young Justice was when Superboy found out that he was a Cadmus clone, or knew he was a Cadmus clone, sorry. He found out that there was specifically a Cadmus code in his brain that would allow him to be shut down, titled Red Sun. Now, we've seen an example of this already in My Hero Academia. When the heroes collapsed on the hospital to apprehend Ujiko, he directly stated, after having his quirk erased by Aizawa, who let's also acknowledge that the registry said that Ujiko was quirkless, so we've already seen the bad guy's information on quirks be wrong. He said the phrase, "Please have mercy," and then he said it a second time and started smiling wide. And that's when Endeavor kind of panicked, because all of a sudden all these Nomu started busting out. They were activated. So we know that activation phrases are a thing that you can program into the Nomu. So all we have to do is, for example, or we don't even need that, look at the scar on Nezu's face. Maybe the reality is that he's got that scar because there's a whole camera system planted into his body, and he only goes to certain people or doctors to get checked, because at the end of the day, it's a pretty special case, and maybe they don't know. Nanotechnology is already a thing in My Hero Academia. Wouldn't surprise me if even if there's just some kind of quirk. We've seen that in Vigilantes that there was this Queen Bee quirk that you could place in someone's eye, which would allow the Queen Bee to control them and do all this other stuff. So there's context within the story that's already been set up surrounding the characters with this plot, where the war arc seems to have just quietly been like, hey, the only person who has been active at UA, both within modern times and the past times, that can give out this much information is Principal Nezu. So the war arc very quietly hands us the answers to who is the UA traitor, as far as I'm concerned. How we're going to go forward from this, I don't know. But I do think it's worth noting that Nezu himself said, I couldn't prove that I wasn't a traitor. Which to me, that implies that what I mentioned earlier, the activation codes or something like that, where he's suspecting himself after all these things that have happened. Especially when I think about how when All For One was questioned about getting access to these bodies, he said it was like dumpster diving outside of a 3-star restaurant. If he's looking at UA as a restaurant, to me, that means he looks at UA as something with a menu. The reason why Shirakumo specifically is a form of dumpster diving is because he was dead. It's already kind of suspicious that UA, for whatever reason, it was handling the body of a student. So that should also raise a red flag, because there's no reason for that to not be handled by a hospital or a proper coroner's office. So the fact that UA actually will take the bodies of their dead students and cremate them strongly suggests that anytime a child or a UA student is injured, they are fed to All For One. From that perspective, how does he know what's on the menu? The UA Sports Festival, the continued footage every year that's broadcast to the world. Make sure that All For One knows exactly what's on the menu at UA, what he's going to be dumpster diving for if they get injured, who he needs to keep tabs on. Because at the end of the day, they had already, during the sports festival, keep in mind, All For One directly told them, hey, Shigaraki, that Midoriya and that Todoroki, those two could be heavy obstacles in your future. He's keeping his eyes on the kids already. So, could it just be a coincidence? Sure. But I think the fact that Nezu always makes it a point to push for these festivals, push for these things that to a certain degree advertise and market the talents of these kids and keeps them on display may be a part of his subconscious programming. And if for some reason, even during these tragedies, you see him randomly seeming to obsess over a sports festival or doing fun activities or putting on some kind of a display because it's supposed to show power. If his brain keeps doing that, if we see that, then that might be the big final clue. But I don't know about you guys, but that's just something I wanted to talk about, is how the war arc with that one page, with that back then, I really wanted to get it my hands on was erasure. That phrase indicates that that was a planned attack, and for him to keep having that information and be able to do that coordinated attack has to be Principal Nezu. So that's the first Spoils of War video. Let me know if you want to keep getting more of these where I break down the war arc in different sections. But yeah, so that's kind of what that Aizawa plot in the beginning was really supposed to do for us. Is not only was it supposed to explain the Nomu, but basically explain how Nezu could be a Nomu and how he would be the traitor without even knowing he was the traitor, and thus be and has been betraying them for years, and how All For One has gotten a hold of some of his Nomu. So, hope you guys had a good day. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, comment something that you thought about this video or discussion down below. Let me know what you think. I'm Aniki. I'm out. Hopefully I'll see you on Sundays for Church of MHA. Bye.